Hi there, welcome back. Today we are talking about our read for the Contemporary Fiction Book Club, and this is Haruki Murakami, The City, and these are Uncertain Walls. Already, for me, the title is complicated, but alright. So yesterday we had our discussion, our meeting for the Contemporary Fiction Book Club, Books on the Rise, and I chaired the discussion, and that was exciting. It was the first time that I actually held the discussion myself, like led the discussion, and that was very enjoyable. I was a bit self-conscious because it's different when people are looking at you and expecting you to kind of give them a clue, or, like ask them things rather than when you're on the other side. But it was really nice, and thank you, Patrick, for that. Yeah, it was a great discussion. We have fun. We talked for over 2 hours. So yeah, to be honest, there is a lot of unfold in the book. Generally, Murakami is very enjoyable and challenging author at the same time, because he has this very engaging style of writing. It's very easy to follow him. He's a page turner, as they say. Like, you really wanna read him. You really wanna read his story, but at the same time, as someone told me, is like you are trying to solve a riddle throughout the book, and so it's like you're trying to solve a puzzle, and you need to pay a lot of attention to the clues, the clues that he kind of leaves around along the pages, along the story. So I feel like I approach the book in that way. So I approach the book thinking, okay, there is a mystery I need to solve. And in the end, I reached the end thinking, okay, the mystery is not solved. So you have this sense of, like, as in other Murakami books, that the mystery hasn't, like, the story hasn't been resolved in a way. Like, you don't really get a sense of closure, which is like typical of Murakami. It's like open-ended. So the story of the city and its uncertain walls is basically the story of a boy who is 17 years old, and he falls in love. He meets this girl, and he falls in love with this girl who is 1 year younger than him, and this girl talks to him about a city, kind of a invisible city, let's say, where a real body is. So she says, the person I'm here is actually just my shadow. My real me is in this city. Then at some point this girl disappears, and this boy is kind of left with this sense of loss and, like, unfulfillment in a way, because he doesn't know what happened to this girl. He doesn't know this much about her, so he cannot actually find her. He tries to find her, but he's also just 17 years old, so he cannot do much. And then the story continues. We don't know anything about the girl, and the boy becomes a man. He ages. He becomes a middle-aged man. He has a job with books, and you have throughout the story this sense of, like, loss and unresolved, because he's kind of waiting for her and thinking of her and thinking of this imaginary city. At some point, he doesn't know how, he manages to get into this city, and he finds her. The thing is that he's an older version of himself, because of course he aged, and the girl is still at 16 years old of age, and he decides to go to this city. She doesn't remember him. He remembers her, and he goes there as a dream reader. So his job is the one of reading dreams. And yeah, then from that, at some point, to enter the city, he is asked to, like, give up his shadow, and his shadow is gonna die without him. So he decides to send his shadow back to the real world, and he decides to stay back. However, we start, I think, the second part that is back in the real world. So he doesn't know how he did it, but it's back to reality in a way. So I feel like throughout the book, of course, you have this sense of like wanting to go back to the city. You know that this thing is not closed. You want closure from these events in a way. You know, you feel like, as in many Murakami's books, you feel like you want to get answers. There is a lot of the classic Murakami book, like some of the tropes. That they go through a lot of his books are like, for example, you know, the girl disappearing, this parallel world that somehow you can access, but you don't really know how. Like these wells, they are like very dark. When you are too much in the darkness, then you can, for too long in the darkness, you can like access this world. So yeah, it's a lot of tropes like the jazz music, cooking, cats, and it was funny because one of the people from the book club put on the WhatsApp group the bingo picture of like Murakami's bingo, and you know, you kind of have all the tropes there. So you even left all of us with this like craving for blueberry muffins. So yeah, you had a lot of the same tropes that you have in other books from Murakami. So yeah, then the story unfolds that he goes to a city in the mountain. He wants to find a job in a library, goes to the city in the mountain, he meets this head librarian who actually died, and he took over the job of head librarian. He thinks that the person he meets is real, actually is a ghost. He manages at some point to get back to the city, so the story is kind of made of different parts, different pieces. I feel like, as in Murakami's style, according to his style, you have this sense of kind of, how to say, this eerie atmosphere throughout the whole book. Like there's something sinister is gonna happen. You feel like, okay, I need to pay attention to the story because something bad is gonna happen to this character. The girl vanished, maybe there is an evil character somewhere. It seems to be the gatekeeper at the beginning. Then throughout the book, none of this happens. So all this creepy and weird atmosphere is inside of you for the whole book, but then nothing actually major happens. So we were trying yesterday to unfold the story and say, okay, what was the point of the city? What was the point of time? What was the point of, like, because time seems to no matter anymore, because in that town there is no time. It's like an eternal present. Time is meaningless. At the same time, there is this topic of dreams. So dreams are like memories, echoes of the people that visited the town before. So they are left behind, and it seems like the town cannot survive if there are feelings. So feelings are kind of seeds of an epidemic for the town. Also, this town is defined as, you know, for his uncertain walls, because the walls always change. So the main character, the protagonist, is trying to draw a map of this town, and he can't because the wall is always changing. The walls are always changing, and they are kind of impenetrable. You know, he cannot like break them, he cannot climb them, but they change all the time. So yeah, there is a lot of stuff going on in this book, like Murakami does all the time. So we were trying to kind of solve the mystery, saying, okay, what was the point of all of this? So what was the point of the shadow? What was the point of the girl? What was the point of her disappearance? There were a lot of interesting ideas, like one of the people at the book club was mentioning the fact that there is this trope of the forest coming back a lot, which is a major thing in like Japanese culture. I personally thought, okay, the forest is the unconscious, because generally forest, even in fairy tales, the forest, the woods, they're like the unconscious. They are a metaphor for the unconscious. That's why going into the woods is like going into the unconscious in a way. However, she mentioned that in Japan there is this like forest that is famous for suicides, and the fact that, you know, the girls disappears, the characters in Murakami's stories always they end up disappearing. So she was mentioning that this is also a phenomenon that is common in Japan, that people feel so separated from each other, like their bodily contact with each other is so minimum that people get depressed, and then also they want either to disappear or to suicide. So yeah, that was something that made me think. And then Jessica, another person from the book club, mentioned that all the story could be a metaphor for mental health. And this kind of brought me to a breakthrough. I could put together all the pieces, I could fit them in the puzzle, because there are so many ideas that are scattered around, that then I felt, okay, I can find a kind of a complete vision of all these pieces. So what she mentioned is that if, of course, you have two levels of reading the story or reading the book. You can have the metaphorical way, like the one that I'm going to talk about now, or you can have like the more like literal way. So they were talking about a fantasy story somehow. Murakami mentions towards the end the idea of magical realism, which is something that was very popular. It is still very popular in Latin America. The case he mentions is the one of Garcia Marquez, which is 100 Years of Solitude. So the idea of magical realism is that you are in a reality, but the ghost and whatever is kind of supernatural belongs to the same reality as you. So in these stories, you're not surprised to find ghosts, you're not surprised to find fairies or magical things. And this made me think as well of Miyazaki. I'm not sure if he's like a Japanese tradition in a way, as I don't know that much about it, but it made me think of Miyazaki when he, in all his movies, you have kind of this intersection between the real world and the magical world, and no one is surprised to be in the magical world. Murakami at one point even used the word Spirited Away, which is like one of the famous movies of Miyazaki. So I'm not sure if he was kind of paying respect to him or if he was picking from a like wider Japanese tradition, but yeah, that's an important trope as well, of this idea of intersection between the worlds. So as I was saying, if we read it from like a literal point of view, we can say the story is kind of magical, fantastical, and you're not really left with an answer at the end. However, this interpretation that Jessica proposed made me think that like this I can fit all the pieces together, because she was saying, what if it's just the story of a person who gets depressed? And I know that this can be a bit underwhelming, but hear me out. So the point of the story is that the city is part of the person, part of the individual. That's why there is no set route to get there. Everyone needs to find their own route to get there. And also the town kind of gets born when the girl talks to the protagonist about it, and he imagines it, and then he creates it. So he is an important part of the town, as the town is an important part of him. Moreover, in the story, we find at some point this kind of neurodivergent character that he calls the Yellow Submarine Boy. And it is atypical, because he's neurodivergent. He can say, like, it's called savant, I think. He can say according to your date of birth, so the day, the month, and the year. He can say which day of the week was it. And there are people like that. That's outstanding. I think is amazing. So he meets this boy that, hearing him talking about the town, can actually draw a map of the town. So this town exists somewhere in the characters, but it can also be accessed by the characters, but everyone needs to find their own way to access this town. So that made me think that we are actually talking about the unconscious, so it's actually a metaphor for the unconscious, as is different for everyone, and is something like not completely accessible. And also because it talks about the shadow, wandering shadows. First thing I thought was like Jungian psychology, so the shadow, Peter Pan, the shadow self, all of that stuff going on. So yeah, I think the town anyway means like, okay, we're talking about the unconscious, but more than that, like it gets more interesting because um, if we think that all of this story is a metaphor for mental health, is like it kind of solves the cognitive dissonance that the story creates, because let's say the girl was a very sad and very depressed girl, and she was very sad, and she even said, like, this was not her real self. So we have this girl that is very depressed and creates this imaginary town where she wants to escape to, because her real self is there, but her shadow self, so she's here, but it's her shadow self, so in our reality. And because he's in love with her, the protagonist starts thinking, okay, let's talk about this town. I want to get there for you. And then she disappears. That it could be just that she disappears because she runs away and then she dies. And he gets depressed himself, so he gets into this town, which is actually a mental dimension. So if we think of the town as a depressive state, it makes much more sense for the whole story, because he is kind of prisoner in this town where the time doesn't pass. The time doesn't exist, the time is not important. And also, he doesn't really have memories. Yes, he has dreams, he has memories, sometimes he is a shadow of himself, as like the shadow and the body can switch places. So, if we think in terms of like mental health, this would make complete sense, because so it would be in a town where time doesn't pass, which is said to happen to people that they have depression, like clinical, depression. They feel like separated from reality. They feel like time doesn't matter anymore. They don't feel their emotions. Rather than emotions, they are kind of detached from their body as well. So there is this separation between the body and the self, because the self is not perceived as the body, also because the person who is depressed doesn't feel like they have an identity anymore. So I think that with this idea in mind, the story talks about this guy that gets really sad, and then from being really, really sad because he's been ghosted in a way by this girl. Like, the girl just disappeared without any explanation. So from there, he gets depressed. I don't want to say, oh, depression is just a very heavy sadness, because it's not. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is that he's a character that is very isolated, is very lonely. There is this sense of loneliness throughout the whole book. And because of that, I think he deattaches more and more and more until he gets depressed. And when he's depressed, the town is a metaphor for his state of being in a place that doesn't belong anywhere, where time is eternal, nothing matters anymore. And yes, there are old memories, kind of ghosts of dreams and emotions that you cannot really feel, but they are there somehow. They're kind of echoes. And then the other thing that made me think of this theory is that at the end of the book, in the third part, he goes back to the town, and this boy, the submarine boy, says to him, I'm you, but I'm kind of your body and you are your mind. So it's him. I'm not sure how, but it's him, even if they're two different people. And then this boy says, if you merge with me, you're gonna come back to yourself again. So they merge together. And then the protagonist is like, okay, but something inside of me doesn't belong here anymore. Something is calling me. It's like something from his heart is calling him. And then he talks with his shadow, and his shadow says to him, you need to believe that something is gonna catch you. So you cannot prevent the fall. The fall is gonna happen, but you need to believe that something is gonna catch you. So if you really desire to go back to the real life, to reality, you can do that. You need to really, really wish it with all your heart. And then you need to believe strongly that something or someone is gonna catch you on the other side. And the protagonist then says to his shadow, okay, how do I know that someone is gonna catch me? And it's like, you need to believe. Like, you need to believe to be that person. And then the book ends. And I think that with this theory, mind or mental health, it makes complete sense, because it's like an act, it's like an act of desire, an act of will. So the character finally decides to get out of this situation where he's in by an act of will. Again, I don't want to underplay the heaviness of depression, say, oh, you just need to wish it. No. But I've been told as well before by a psychologist that has more authority than me on this, that very often when you are in a very deep state of sadness, you need to kind of find the strength to get out of that situation, because you're like in moving sand. So you need to find this strength inside of you. As I said, if it's a clinical depression, if it's like if we're talking about heavy mental health condition, I don't mean to underplay at all. I don't mean to like underestimate either, because I can understand what it means. I never been depressed myself, but I had situational depression, and it's very heavy, and it's not even close to clinical depression, so I get it. But yeah, it's like an act of will. Like, you need to wish it. You need to wish it so strongly that actually you can get out of the situation. And that's what happened to the character. I even wrote down a note on that, actually, because what was he saying? Oh, I'm gonna find it. But yeah, I think with this perspective in mind, it makes much more sense. The whole story makes much more sense. Because these characters are so lonely, they don't belong anywhere, they're so lost, and they get to a place where they feel like they belong, but they don't belong completely. And yeah, that was kind of a breakthrough for me. But yeah, I found the quote. So in page 434, so basically at the end of the book, it says, we probably couldn't find a way to prevent the fall, but there is a way to keep it from being fatal. Like what? Believing. Believing in what? That someone on the ground will catch you, believing that from the bottom of your heart, without holding back, absolutely unconditionally. And then the protagonist say, who would catch my fall from such a terrible high? Assuming there was someone. And then he said, as my imagination spun around pointlessly, the flame of the candle suddenly vanished, and the pitch-black darkness surrounded me. And that's how the book ends. And yeah, I think that he kind of realizes that he is that person that needs to catch him. And that's how he comes back to himself, and he comes back to reality, and he kind of solves the mystery in a way. This has been a very kind of brief, how to say, review of the book, because I understand it's a very thick book. It's full of tropes, ideas, time, and consciousness, and the shadow, and cats and blueberry muffins. So sex, because there is always weird sex in Murakami. So yeah, I know it has been quite brief, but I just wanted to share. It was a great discussion yesterday, and I hope it made sense. So thank you for watching again. See you next time.